Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kerri Stewart. I am a registered dietitian with Spartanburg Regional Healthcare System in our Heart Resource Center. And this is our monthly Veg Edge in the kitchen. Today, we have Mark Pearce, who is our Director of Food Service over at Spartanburg Medical Center. And he is here to specifically talk to us about everything we need to know about knives. And the more cooking that I've been doing, especially the more plant foods I feel like you start to use, there are different knives that can really help or make your process easier. I know sometimes it seems like we're just constantly chopping, and you could chop for days and days and days with all of your produce items. So he's got all sorts of gadgets that I'm really excited to learn more about alongside with you. So thank you, Mark, for being here with us this month. And so we'll talk about all of this first and then do a pico de gallo for you and just show some other produce items like a butternut squash, a sweet potato that might traditionally be your really hard, hefty vegetables. So give you some tips and tricks on that too, so that everything can be a little bit easier. So
Thank you, Kerri.
thank you.
My name is Mark Pearce, and I've been with the health system for 10 years. I did the math, and I've been in hospital management for 33 years now. So glad to be here and to show off some of my oddball knives, as well as demonstrate what skills I've picked up. So one of the things I will say is, so this is probably what most folks grew up with. This is an old hickory. This is probably as old as I am. And one of the things I'll point out is that you can use any knife safely if you use the right technique. So this is a good knife for typically butchering, but it can also be used for chopping veg. One of the things I will point out is when you're cutting veg, you really want to make sure that you've got a gap so your hand clears the vegetable, or you don't pinch your finger in there. The other thing is you really want to hold with a pinch versus hold like this. So a lot of folks try to use the handle, and that actually restricts your movement. Some other pieces I have. In the 70s, my mom, like most moms, did the knife home sale. This knife was part of that and works great as a bread knife still to this day. So that's probably 45 years ago. Probably 40. Yep. This right here, back in the 18th century, forks were not a common utensil for eating. Folks did use the spoon, and they used the knife. And this particular shape is for scooping up food and using the back of the blade to eat with. So that's a nice little historical piece there. Other types of knives you could find. This is actually recycled from a saw blade. This works as a nice boning knife. And when we talk about knife skills, there's times you want to have a flex and then times you don't. This is another one of my knife curiosities. This is a hand forged knife. Very, very nice high carbon steel, holds an edge very well. And another one from my childhood. This is actually a chopper for greens. So if your family had the tradition of cooking greens whole, you would then use this chopper to cut it into smaller pieces. And this really comes in handy for biscuits as well. So I actually do use this. Another often overlooked tool is shears. So shears can save you a lot of time and knife work. So let's say this was some parsley and you just needed the leaves. You could come at this at an angle and get the leaves and less stem and be a little bit faster on processing. In terms of sharpening, got several different, oh, I'm still missing knives here. So this is your chef's knife. This is one without a bolster. So the bolster is the back end of the knife here. Some people like it as an extra protection. I personally prefer this one. It's easier to sharpen. Again, it's how you hold the knife and control it. This is a vegetable cleaver, and this is flat on one side, sharpened to 17 degrees on the other. It's very good for processing veg. It's a new knife for me, and like all knife skills, once you're using a different knife, you need to learn new techniques. So I'm having fun learning again. I like this particular style of knife for actually julienning and picking things off the cutting board. This is one of my. This is probably in everybody's kitchen drawer somewhere, or you've seen these. Really inexpensive paring knives. This is one of my wife's go-to. Nothing particular wrong with this. They are rather difficult to sharpen, and they don't hold an edge well. But she still makes me sharpen them. This is called a nakuri. I think I'm saying that right. This is a Japanese style cleaver. What's different about this one and the Chinese cleaver is that this has a bevel on both sides. It's also sharpened to 17 degrees or 16 degrees, and it's extremely sharp. It's really good for processing tough vegetables.
So the bevel is the blade thickness? Is that the best way?
So the bevel is what you're setting the cutting or the honing or sharpening surface to. So if we take a stone like this is 90. So this is 45. 22.5 degrees, 17 would be a little bit closer to the stone if that has a good visual.
Mm-hmm.
And so
okay.
22 degrees or 20 degrees is typical for a chef's knife and most kitchen knives. It's a durable edge, and it holds up well. The thinner angle or lower angle is much sharper, but will tend to wear faster. So I did demonstrate really the concept of how to use a sharpening stone. Again, if you know this is 90, 45, you go a little bit further down, 20 degrees is kind of what you're looking, and you would move this back and forth in this motion. I've also seen folks move it in this way as well. This is how I used to sharpen knives. I've since moved on to something that is a little more controllable. So this gadget here, and I'm not really proposing it. I'm not really recommending any particular brand or product, but this is one that allows you to set the angle, and then as you use or move the knife along, you get that consistent bevel. And this one has varying levels of abrasive, so you really want to start with a coarse one. As you pick up a knife and look at it on the side, you can see that there are chips in the edge. You'll want to clean those off with a coarse grind before you start the sharpening process, so you have a nice clean bevel.
So almost if you can bring any knife back to life, right?
Yes.
Do you ever really need to throw a knife away if you just sharpen
I wish I'd brought my wife's grandmother's knife, because it literally is shaped like this from years of wear and sharpening, and you can bring that knife back. That when a knife has that much wear, you have to deal with the contours because you're not going to straighten it out. But yes, so if this were damaged, I would simply just grind this flat.
Okay.
And then start the bevel back.
Okay.
It's a single bevel. I
didn't even think about that. So some just have the angled surface on one side,
That's
so
it.
single bevel, and some are done on both sides.
Yes.
Ah,
And
okay.
so something like this, I would simply just take a high abrasive. I think the most coarse I have is like a 120,
Okay.
and really just grind it down evenly, trying to keep the same number of passes on each side
Okay.
until that metal ding is gone. And
Wow.
actually, this knife is probably 30 years old, and it's been chipped up many times,
Uh-huh.
to the point where I've actually had to file down the bolster so that
Oh,
I could sharpen it because it was starting to get a turn in
okay.
this. So this is a very high quality knife, a Hinkle.
Yeah.
So it's one of the few, as you can see from my knife collection, name brand knives you're going to see.
Yeah. So a lot of people can salvage what they have instead of just throwing them all away or donating them to Goodwill or something. And if we just sharpen them and hone them and keep them
Yeah,
and bring them back to
and
life.
so even a metal file. So if you
Okay.
take one of these and have a good sharp file, you can actually just turn it into a blank and start sharpening it.
Wow.
I've made knives by hand, and so it's the same process. You're just starting with a bigger chunk of metal and working it down. And that's really what's been done with this forged knife. So the knife has been forged into a blade, and then the blacksmith adds this taper, and then you sharpen to the final thickness. So I showed you the one that's belt driven. This is another type of knife sharpener, and this one has 3 different grits on it. So there's a 320 grit. That's the coarse for getting rid of the dings and the damage. Then you've got an 800. This is good for creating a nice smooth edge, and this is actually a honing edge. And so what honing is different than sharpening. When you sharpen, you bring out a burr. And if you look at it under a microscope, it's like a piece of wire. And you can actually feel a burr move back and forth in your hand when it's sharp enough. When you hone that, you're breaking that burr and creating that sharper edge. So this one is nice, or like this, because it is also adjustable for the different angles of knives for sharpening. And this is the type that I get my mom, because my Christmas present for her is usually sharpening every knife in her house. But she's not going to use a stone. This is something that she can use really easily. You make a number of passes. One's coarser, one's finer. This is a good general purpose sharpening tool. And what I typically do, my wife will probably say no, but I typically sharpen twice a year, and then I use this rather than like a steel, because the steel's going to create that burr. If I were cutting meat as a meat cutter or working in a high production kitchen, the steel would be an important tool.
Okay.
Because you want to keep that edge and keep moving.
Yeah.
And we don't have one to show you, but a lot of folks just kind of put their elbows everywhere. If you hold it at a 45-degree angle and the knife at a 45-degree angle,
Okay.
you should make passes so it doesn't come anywhere near your finger.
And the steel you may have in your just traditional knives, that it's that long rod looking thing. So now you know what it is if you have it and haven't been using it.
Yeah, it's one of those, you got it, but how do you use it?
Yeah.
So, with steels too, for beginners, you can just place a towel down, put the steel down, and use it like this.
There you go. Stabilize
not
it
gonna
and
hurt your hands.
yeah.
So this is the style I use in between sharpenings. And
how often do you sharpen with that tool?
so if my wife's been using the knife, every time I pick it up.
Okay, that's
I'm just
kind of
kidding.
very, yeah.
I'm-
Well,
I'm
I've
just
heard
kidding.
that about honing with the steel
Yeah.
is that should be done every time you use
Yes,
your knife, or
so once I've done a sharpen like this is going to last a while.
okay.
Don't put it in the dishwasher.
Yeah.
A high
Okay.
carbon steel. There was a mate to this that was placed in the dishwasher and it snapped.
Oh, I guess that
So-
would cause you to throw your knife out finally if it
Well,
actually
it's
snapped
only-
your
only
blade.
this long. Hard to use. So and it also depends on how much I'm going to be cutting. So if I know I'm going
Okay.
to be processing a lot of food, I'm going to go ahead and sharpen
Yeah.
so I don't have to stop halfway through.
Okay.
And really it depends on how often the knives are used. So in our household, the chef's knives are used a lot.
Yeah.
I'm really the only one that uses this. So when I pick this up, it's usually going to
Ready
be
to go.
sharp enough to go.
Very cool.
So some stories that I was telling Kerri about when, as a kid, this was the most common knife on the farm. My family is tobacco farmers, and we had a porch, a concrete step into the back of the house.
Mhm.
And my grandmother would take her old hickory and go out there and use the cement steps to sharpen it. And I would imagine that's why my wife's grandmother's knife looks the way it did. It was very common to sharpen that way. Some other things you can do as little tips. If you've got a porcelain coffee cup that's got an unglazed bottom, or if you have a plate with an unglazed bottom, you can actually use that as a steel if you need to get
Wow.
to get a edge back.
Nice. Fun little useful tricks, no matter what you have at home.
Yep. So I guess
Ready to start chopping?
ready to start chopping.
If anyone has any questions about the processes of sharpening, honing, the different types of knives Mark was using, go ahead and throw those in our question and answer. I'm going to come back up there with him, and we'll keep at it, but go ahead and throw those in there. So now is your chance to ask anything you want to know. And I do have just an observation that none of the knives you have are ceramic. Is that a personal preference? Is that
So
how do you sharpen ceramic with those?
So ceramic is nothing that I can sharpen. So
Okay.
yeah, it's going to last longer. It's going to be more brittle. It's going to be more expensive. But if you look at my collection of knives here, as I said, this is the nicest one. Really what I'm after is something that I can maintain and use and reuse.
So ceramic, you can't do that.
Well, I think you can. Some of the shows I've seen where you can send it off to a service,
Okay.
but I'm not aware of any sharpener that can handle ceramics.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So I feel like some of them can be a lot more affordable just online these days, but if you're not getting something that you can, some of these keep for a lifetime.
Yes.
Or passed down from generation to generation. That's
Well,
very
some
fun.
things that you'll see online as options is something called Damascus steel, and it's not really Damascus steel, and you're going to pay if you want a really good Damascus knife. You're going to pay. So if you see it coming from offshore countries, you're just not going to be able to get an edge on it. And that's the same with the ceramic knife. They may be able to make the ceramic, but it may not be sharpened.
Yeah, and that makes sense because I feel like all the ceramic knives I've seen are they're so skinny compared to even a beveled edge on a regular knife like that. That makes sense. Okay.
One of the things I would like to point out about knife skills too is that this is the tradition I grew up with, and I don't think I saw a chef's knife until um, um, one of the cooking shows. What was her name?
Julia Child.
Thank you. Yes, Julia Child was the first time I saw a chef's knife, and I worked my way as a meat cutter's apprentice through college, and you're not going to find any of these in the butcher shop area. You're going to have specific knives for those. So this specific to food service, it's a good utility knife, but by no means do you have to go out and buy a chef's knife.
If you could pick 2 or 3 knives for the home cook, just to make sure, or maybe spend up a little bit more on, or what have you, what would you say are the most important to have?
So I would pick a chef's knife. I would pick a boning knife, and I would pick a paring knife.
Okay. I'm going to go zoom in on that for everyone before you move those.
Well, these are not pretty knives at all, but that would be the ones I'd choose.
They've been well loved.
Yeah.
There we go. So from this angle, it looks like we've got the paring on the left, the boning in the center, and the chef's on the right.
Yes.
How many inches is that chef's knife? Because I know
This is
sometimes
about
there's
8.
8. Okay.
Yeah, you can get them. You can get them.
I've seen 5,
14.
Yeah, or
so I think 8 and 10 are pretty handy. It's really what feels good in your hand. Again, too, when you're starting knife skills, if this is the knife skill you started with, and you're going to pick up a chef's knife, you're going to have to learn skills to maximize it, and that's what I was talking about with the vegetable chopper.
Yeah.
This is a new knife skill for me because I haven't used it.
Can you lay that one down on the towel so everyone can see that too? Just for comparison's sake. So that is, that's a pretty impressive knife. And I feel like it doesn't have that. It would just feel weighted differently in your hand compared to some of the other ones. And
yeah, and so it's not a meat cleaver. So a meat cleaver is going to be significantly heavier than this.
Oh, okay.
This is really an all-around knife. You can use it to do pretty much anything.
Okay.
So rather than this will handle the paring and the chef's knife, not so much boning because it's not flexible, but yeah, it's
okay.
This is a nice little knife as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, we can.
Any questions, or is
Nope,
everybody
no questions right now, so we can continue to start actually chopping and using them.
Okay, so kitchen safety, first thing you want to do is stabilize your cutting board. So a damp towel works really well. Damp paper towel works really well. We got our cutting board down. Let's see, just go with the chef's knife. So what do we want to start with? Save the onion till later because everything gets all oniony.
Yeah.
So with a tomato, you simply open it up. If you're worried about these little guys right here, you can just chop them out like that. You can also take a paring knife, obviously, and go around, or you can simply eat it.
There we go.
Yep. So you watch TV, and there are a lot of folks that do knife skills, and they're way better than me. So I'm just going to show you what I do. One, the food you're cutting needs to be natural for your position. So it doesn't need to look like this if this is where you're comfortable. And I've learned several different techniques. One is you'll see chefs that'll hold it like this and then they'll swipe through. I prefer to just put my heel down and then use my fingers to actually control the depth.
Okay.
So that keeps me from slicing towards myself in a way that could be dangerous.
Yeah.
And then
you can see he's got a nice claw technique. So
thank you. Yeah.
I always notice that. So making sure that that knife blade butts up to his knuckles and not any little fingers hanging out under there.
I think my wife must have used this knife.
Needs sharpening. I was going to say I can get you a scrap bucket too. for.
Well, I got this one down.
Yep, perfect. So we chose a fresh salsa just because there are so many different types of cuts and dices and chops and minces and all that that can go into a salsa. So that is one thing that I've learned, especially while you're letting the rest of your dinner cook, can come together really easily and quickly, and a lot of flavor, and just taste so much better when it's really fresh like that instead of some of those ones in the jars. So that knife is very impressive as well. So that's one of the reasons we just picked this to demonstrate, was all the different types of chops. So I'll send out a sheet that has some of the different names. But Mark and I were talking about that earlier too. And, you know, it's not so much about the size in something like a fresh salsa. If you're in culinary school, that's really important, and they're going to grade you on certain types and dices and cuts and whatnot. But what is most important is that you are using your knife safely. So if you like larger chunks of tomato in your salsa, do it larger. If you want them smaller, do it smaller. So,
and irregular bits taste just fine.
They sure do.
So yeah, let's see. How many? We just want to do one tomato or both?
Yeah, we've got 2.
Okay. Do which knife? Which knife? So this guy.
Ah.
And remember, I'm just learning this skill myself. So. But this thing's wicked.
Feel like you could just.
So this one is a little harder to do the push and pull like the other because of the brighter blade, but I feel very confident with just the size and flatness.
So I can tell that your knives must be really sharp too, because I feel like when I'm at home, if I'm cutting a tomato or a bell pepper or something with kind of a waxy shell, I choose the serrated knife to make sure that it kind of grips into that. Is that even the correct use for a serrated knife? Or
so whatever knife helps you get it done.
Okay.
And that's part of the reason why I brought this assortment, is that you just need to practice the skills.
Yeah.
And one of the things too is how you use the knife. So if you simply push a knife down, it's going to mash everything out.
Yeah. Okay.
You need to push it forward, and then you will see your results are a lot better.
I should have zoomed in. So you were kind of coming at the produce at an angle and rocking your wrist.
Yeah, you're basically, and this is probably easier shown with like a boning knife. You're cutting in and then dropping, and that thawing motion.
In and dropping. Nice. Okay.
And this is one of the reasons I like using the cleaver, because you got a scraper.
I just thought of another type of knife, and I don't know what these words are or what the term for it is, but some of them that have kind of the little divots in the side of it. Is that I think I heard it's to prevent the produce from sticking to the knife? Or
yeah, I think that I want to say those are on a military knife. It's called a fuller, I believe.
Okay.
And yeah, it's just to create a gap. Part of the reason this is at one angle in the Asian tradition is it helps the produce fall a particular way, so it doesn't.
Okay.
So, all right, so we got the chopper.
All right, we've got our tomatoes.
All right, what next? We'll use my wife's favorite.
Yep. There we go.
And we're just gonna squeeze this, right?
Yep. You can, one of the tips that I like to talk about is to roll the lime, lemon, orange, whatever it is. If you've end up with one that's particularly hard, you can use your body weight to roll it across your cutting board when it's whole a couple times, or Mark is using a pretty neat technique with a spoon to juice by hand, so you don't need a fancy juicer either.
Okay. Let's go with a jalapeno.
You want gloves for your jalapeno? Don't put your fingers in your eyes.
Yeah, contacts in today. So this is where you saw that did really well, but this is where a smaller knife would actually come in. If you don't want your peppers to be as hot, you can remove this membrane.
So most of the spice is in the membrane or the seeds or both?
It's in the membrane as much as I know. Unless you're pepper expert. It's in the seeds too. So.
We'll have to do a whole episode on spice. Speaking of which, we would love that too. So if anyone has suggestions or ideas for topics you'd like to hear about, please let us know.
So the other thing you could do when it was open is you could actually cut it like that and then remove it out. But
so we do have a question that was about serrated knives. So I think we just talked about that a little bit, but in terms of sharpening, I don't think we talked about that. So serrated knives.
So serrated knives, there are techniques to sharpen serrated knives using this style of sharpener here, but typically, typically that's not something a homeowner is going to do.
Yeah.
This knife here, it's never been sharpened.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, so it's always worked. Now I'm not using it as a carver, but
right.
Yeah,
that's not your daily use knife.
Yeah, I would consider. Serrated knives as kind of use until you can't use them anymore.
Okay. Yeah.
And in our kitchen, they're not allowed.
Oh, okay.
Because when they do cut you, they do a really good job of cutting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Mark's gonna wash his hands to make sure that he doesn't run around with spicy eyes the rest of the afternoon.
okay. So with an onion, I think you've probably seen enough YouTube videos to know you want to leave the little root bit attached until you finish processing. But this is another one where I prefer to use the pulling technique because it's a stiff, firm vegetable, and I'm not sitting there swiping at my hand.
So the way you just cut that onion is giving you a really fine. Is this a dice?
It is.
Okay.
And there's all sorts of techniques for dice. I've seen chefs that just do one. I learned 3. That's what I typically do when I
Okay.
do. And then there's different folks have different techniques for how they handle the heel and finishing up the dice.
Yeah.
So I think I'm just going to go with that one.
Yeah, that looks like
there.
plenty of purple I see in that bowl.
Yeah.
What's the difference in a chop and a dice?
So chop is literally just down the road. The
Okay.
dice is you're coming at it in two different planes. So you're coming at it this way, and then you're coming this way. So the tomatoes and onions were both diced,
Okay.
whereas slicing would simply be just cutting straight across.
So it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the size or,
Well, it depends on what you want to do with the ingredient.
yeah. Okay.
Something like salsa, you certainly wouldn't want to leave sliced tomatoes.
Tomato wedges.
Well, if you were using like, the little grape size, that'd be fine. But
That's true.
so here's the benefit of the cleaver.
Ah, nice. Look at that. Wow. We got that fully on camera.
That's the special effects for today.
Yeah.
When it comes to garlic, a lot of folks like to cut the ends off. But once you've done that, you can take and just come across this way and then spin it, come across this way. And this is true for both this knife and the chef's knife. You can get the old rocking action you've seen.
Okay.
Actually, for a lot of dishes, I've moved to just cutting my cloves just thin, because the more you work the garlic, the more bitter it gets. And so if you just slice it thin, you're going to get the flavor without the bitterness.
Nice.
All right, so that's done.
Cilantro.
Cilantro.
Yeah, can't forget cilantro in our fresh salsa.
Oh.
I bet that can just be chopped.
Yeah, and so just turn it into a little ball so it stays put, and then just work it down. And you talked about the crab technique. I think everybody's watching knows you don't put your fingers out like this. You just tuck them under. There you go.
Nice. All right.
All right.
Like that. We'll add a little, help you add a little salt and pepper to it, and
okay. And while you
I
do
can
that,
clean off your
this around, and
okay.
we'll move to the tougher vegetables.
It looks awesome. So I am going to give it a little bit of salt because that does help soften some of the veggies and bring out the moisture. So salt actually retains fluid, same as it does in our body. So if we eat too much sodium, that's when we can have that fluid overload, especially important for heart patients that we're working with. So, but it does serve a chemical purpose when it comes to culinary as well. So that is part of the reason I'm putting it on here. It can also help kind of mask some of those really strong bitter flavors that you might get from the onion, that you might get from the garlic, draw some of the more of that moisture out of the tomatoes and help season them a little bit. So, and then I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of black pepper on here. And I'm going to use the spoon Mark had to just give all of this a good stir. And we're going to be eating some delicious pico de gallo today. Look at that. Beautiful. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different colors in here as well. So that's pretty darn good for one dish. And all of those different colors are actually going to contribute different nutrients to our system. So beautiful. All right, I'm going to zoom in on that one more time and then okay. So there is our fresh pico. Ta-da. All right, perfect. What are we going to do next?
So let's move to some of the tougher things. So I don't know if folks in food land know this, but we can actually trace this back to the individual that developed butternut squash. It was an individual outside of, it was either an Air Force base or an Army base. And he
Uh-huh.
began growing this squash and
Huh.
selling it. And next thing you know, the Army shows up, or the armed forces, and they want to buy this thing. So this is actually a modern cultivar, as it were.
Huh.
So as we said before the filming, what I typically do is just poke this guy with a fork, go in the
Mhm.
microwave for 5 minutes, let it get soft.
I think that's a really important tip. So I'm going to write that in for everyone, because any of those winter squash can be so tough to cut, especially
Yeah.
if your knife is not sharp. So,
And so if we're just going to go at it, first thing you want to do with anything you're cutting is give yourself a flat surface. Typically, this section up here, I'm not going to have to worry about seeds too much. So I'm just going to cut down through there.
mm,
And then now that it's nice and even, then I'm just going to start turning it and cutting it, turning it and cutting it. And this is actually a great technique for like cantaloupe, honeydew,
mm.
rutabagas. So once I get that side done, just come at it. And this is why I say I usually just throw it in the microwave, because
Yep.
you got the groove, you got the groove. But the other thing with these is you can actually just roast them skin on. And then,
Oh, okay.
yeah, not a lot. Faster.
I've actually used my paring knife to do the holes too, instead of the fork. So on something like a spaghetti squash, that's been, and then it's amazing if you cook it the whole way in the microwave, you can even slice through it with that paring knife with one hand. So the microwave can be good for something.
Yes. So just keep working your way around. And it's, it's this oddball type stuff that you've got to just kind of play with what you're given. So if I were going to dice this, that cutting motion. Once I've got my planks,
I admittedly buy butternut squash either pre-chopped or frozen, in which it is pre-chopped.
well, and that's, so it's going to cost you more.
Yeah, yeah.
But if that's, if you need to do that,
The frozen is pretty affordable though, I'm finding.
Yeah.
But then I know it may not roast properly if that's what you're trying to do with it. But I've been eyeing some sauces to make with it. So get that.
so a little matchsticks, well, not matchsticks, but any way you want to. Once you've got it broken down, you can chop it any way you want.
Almost looks like cheese from here.
Yeah. Some nice cheese.
We can make a plant-based cheese with our butternut squash. Wow, very good. All right.
So let's see. This is also a tough one.
Yeah.
Let's just say I wanted to do some matchsticks.
Maybe some shoestring sweet potato fries.
Obviously, a potato peeler would do this too.
One less dish to clean.
Once I've got my planks, I can lay them out and and as fine as you want.
Oh yeah, look at
Yeah.
that. Nice. What's your favorite thing to do with a sweet potato then?
Put it in a pie.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I can agree with
So
that.
I lived in a community called Elkin, North Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in the foothills of the Appalachia,
Mm.
and they actually had something called a sonker.
Okay.
And a sonker is a sweet potato casserole,
Okay.
kind of like a cherry cobbler
Okay.
or apple cobbler.
Uh-huh.
And they actually had a festival.
Oh,
And so
fun.
the big argument during the Sonker Festival was whether you use the white sweet potatoes or the yellow sweet potatoes. To me, it tasted like sweet potato pie.
So did it have like a crumble on the top of it, or
No, it had a pie crust.
a
on
pie
top.
crust
Yeah.
on the top? Okay.
It was pretty neat.
That
It's the
sounds
only place
delicious.
I've ever heard of Sonker.
I have never heard of it, so that's a very fun.
Another dish they had there was they called it pea porridge.
Okay.
So yeah, so it was kind of like a thickened pea
Okay.
dish. So
Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
That sounds like it'll go great together. We got our protein from our peas and a little sweetness or good starch and beta carotene, vitamin A from our sweet potatoes. Well,
So I will point out that my wife would be yelling at me right now for the mess. But
in my kitchen, it can be messy.
well, in a commercial kitchen, you're going to be these kind of messes until you change to the next task.
Yep, that's true. Yeah, and I think that's a good point. That's one of the things that we do try to talk a lot about in cooking class, and just be mindful of that. The more you have over a workstation, the potential risk for cuts or something happening is greater. Mark is a trained professional, so that is why he is allowed to have so many knives and everything going on here. But that is one thing, especially if you're not super comfortable or you have that big knife that you're learning how to use. Just keep clearing your station. Make sure that there's nothing else around it, no one else around it, and that will help you be safer in the long run. So,
all right.
We didn't have any other questions, so I'll give everyone a couple more minutes to write
asleep.
anything. Nope, they're sharpening their knives. That's what they're doing. And so we can't thank you enough for joining us.
Okay.
I learned so much, and now also really have a drive to even go home and see what knives I have. And I mean, this paring knife has a metal. This is metal, right?
Yeah, that was in everybody's home when I was a kid.
It makes me want to plunder knives. That's what it wants to make me do. Go to Goodwill or Habitat Restore and see what I can find and
probably
save
a yard sale.
A yard sale. Estate sale. See just what kinds of, I mean, this one too. This is heavier than I thought with the handle there, and the handle's just nice and curved. Very
my
cool.
brother-in-law was over and I made some fresh bread, and I used this to obviously cut the bread. He borrowed my Restaurant Depot card trying to find this knife. It's like, you're about 40 years too late.
They don't make them like this anymore.
No.
So that's very cool. Just how knives can tell a little bit of culinary history and family history. And so thank you for bringing so many awesome knives to share with us and all the devices. So hopefully you will go home and take care of your knives